I'm Eric, and this is not an audio review channel where I don't do audio reviews. I'm not here to help you make purchasing decisions, but I want to tell you a story about some things I learned about audio gear and why I replaced a $2,000 MSRP headphone amp and preamp with a $400 one, which I also preferred to a $1,400 MSRP integrated amp. This video is just an experiment to see if I like doing this and people like watching it, so let me know if you think I should make more videos with a comment and a like and a subscribe and the things. So after going through far too much gear in various tubes, I thought I had endgamed, yeah, I know, with this ZMF Pendant headphone amp and preamp, paired with this Parasound A23 Plus power amp, which I'm not going to try hauling in front of the camera because it's huge. Each of these have an MSRP of about $2,000, though the Pendant is discontinued, though the amp it's based on, the Amps & Sound Lilu, is available again for $1,600. I got the Pendant used for $1,000 from someone who gave me a good deal, and the A23 Plus for used $1,200. I also got this Xduoo A17 Pro preamp for about $700 new, for when I didn't want to wait for tubes to warm up or wanted a more solid state sound, or I didn't want to burn down tubes when I was having work meetings or watching talking head videos or whatever. Right now you're either going, those numbers are eye-popping, I can't believe you spent that much money, and that's actually my own reaction most of the time. Or you're like, that's all budget gear, in which case I hate you. The thing is, the Pendant was never perfect. It's great, don't get me wrong, and particularly with the Brimar input tubes and these Amperex power tubes, it sounds rich and full and powerful in a way I've never heard solid state do. And it seemed like a clear step up from the bottlehead crack I had before, which also didn't have a preamp output, making it less useful. But it also has this sense of, I don't know, crunchiness and thickness in the note weight that could be interpreted as detail or texture or definition, but always just sounded to me like not smoothness, though the tubes I got were smoother than the stock ones. I kind of got used to it though, and I had the S17 Pro for when I wasn't in the mood. But it occurred to me that maybe I could downgrade. I didn't need something as good as the S17 Pro for meetings and things, and if I got a separate solid state chain for that, then I could theoretically replace the S17 Pro, the Pendant, and the A23 with a single integrated tube amp. At first I was looking at the Prima Luna stuff, but there's lots of less expensive options nowadays, like the Williston things, Musashare, KN, and so forth. Finally, I settled based on reviews on the LSA VT-70, which retails for $1,200 new, but which I found on the used market for $900. Considering it was replacing gear that cost me $2,200, that seemed like a pretty good downgrade, and going all tubes seemed like a sure way to get something that sounds better because tubes sound better. Anyone can get better sound by spending more money, but getting better sound by spending less money, now that's challenging. Meanwhile, I already had a Modi Magni stack lying around, so I bought a pair of $350 iLoud micro monitors, which I'd already heard and knew sounded good. I actually got these less than $350, I don't remember. And were more neutral than my beloved Q Acoustic Concept 30s that are my main speakers. Neutral isn't normally what I go for, but I could use them to check mixes and as a reference sound. And the iLouds Plus, the Magni Plus, and Modi Plus still cost together quite a bit less than the S17 Pro they would replace. And at first, I got the VT-70, and it seemed amazing. Huge soundstage and holographic effect on the speakers that I never got using a solid-state power amp. Slam for days. My only complaint was that it was kind of V-shaped. The extra bass emphasis didn't bother me, I actually liked it, but the treble emphasis and the etchiness and sharpness it had, which could maybe be like the hi-fi sound that a lot of higher-end speakers and gear have that I hate, I didn't like. And it didn't have anything like the mid-range richness of the Pendant with the tubes I had for it. But I'd improved the Pendant mid-range with tube rolling, and I hoped I could do the same with the VT-70, and was basically set to sell the other stuff off. Another thing I discovered was that the VT-70 has a 4 ohm tap and an 8 ohm tap. These are the level of impedance of the speaker they're designed for, which is like the amount of resistance or something the electric circuit has, I don't know. I'm just a guy who listens to things here. But the important thing is that I have 6 ohm speakers. The manual says that if you have 6 ohm speakers, try the 4 ohm tap first, and then try the 8 ohm tap and see which one you like better. And I discovered that the 8 ohm tap reduced the treble emphasis and some of the sharpness I heard. The thing, I need more props. The thing was, though, as I started putting some different tubes in it, I noticed something. What I'd taken for etchiness didn't seem like etchiness when I used more mid-range rich tubes. It actually seemed exactly like the crispy thickness I experienced on the Pendant. Now, to be clear, especially once I'd rolled the tubes, the KT-77 tubes sounded great, but I like the KT-66 tubes even better. Yes, I know this was supposed to be a downgrade, and I spent all this money on tubes, and I rationalized that I could sell them later, but I know I get obsessive. The amp doesn't even say it works with KT-66, but they sound good, and the bias seems stable, so what the hell? If it explodes, at least I'll die happy. Anyway, with the KT-66s, this effect was relatively subtle, as it became in the Pendant as well. I would barely even notice it when I would start listening to something if I wasn't specifically looking for it. But I spent all day in my home office working and basically listening to music the whole time. And it's the kind of thing that after a while would get to bother me. And it made me realize that I think I've been intentionally listening to the S17 Pro more than the Pendant because of that attribute without even realizing it. The thing is, the bottlehead crack hadn't had this characteristic. I thought it was just something about the Pendant, but my experience with the VT-70 brought to mind someone who told me that to them, all output transformer coupled, or OTC amps, had a certain characteristic he didn't like. And I recalled on the website of Linear Tube Audio, a company that makes output transformerless tube amps, OTL, it said that they believed transformers added what they called haze to the sound. The VT-70 and the Pendant both have output transformers. Was this what I was hearing? Was I sensitive to this? I'm sensitive to a lot of things in audio, it seems, which is another reason why this isn't a review channel. I can't promise that you'll hear or react to things the way I do. Was this just something specific to OTC amps, and I needed to get an OTL amp instead? I'm not going to get into the technical differences between OTC and OTL amps, though I'll put a link in the description. But basically, OTC tube amps use a transformer to lower the output impedance, which makes the amp compatible with more headphones or speakers. But I primarily use high impedance headphones like the Sennheiser HD6XX and ZMF Atrium, which go great with OTL tube amplifiers. My speakers are another story entirely, but we'll get there. Do you hear a difference between OTC? Bang, bang, bang. Do you hear a difference between OTC and OTL amps? This isn't me begging for comments or the algorithm. I'm actually curious. Let me know in the comments. So I decided to test my theory. I looked at a number of cheap OTL tube amps and settled on the Xduoo TA-84 from Drop, primarily because it uses the same tube complement as the Pendant, though with 2 input tubes rather than 1. So it felt like I could hear more of what the amp was doing to the sound on its own. It cost $400 normally, though when I bought it, it was on sale for $300 for the holidays, and it's also available with a 30-day no questions return policy. So I'd get the amp, see whether it had this quality, and then return it, and if I wanted an OTL, I could find something better and more expensive. So the TA-84 arrived, and sure enough, it had none of the etchiness or whatever I heard in the Pendant or the VT-70. Not even a little bit. In fact, it was crazy smooth and liquid sounding, smoother than my solid state amps. In every other way, though, it was inferior to the 2 OTC amps, much less clear and controlled, kind of loose and baggy sounding. And now I was sad, because the number of higher end OTL tube amps is much smaller than OTC, a lot fewer to choose from, and there's very few OTL speaker amps, and most of them are expensive and require speakers that have much higher impedances than my 6 ohm QC30s. I mean, it seemed like the only solution on the market really is the patented Zodal technology used by Linear Tube Audio, which allows an OTL amp to have a lower output impedance without a transformer. but the Z40 Plus integrated from them costs $7,650 base, which is, eye-bleeding money. Even the Xduoo 40 power amp alone starts at $6,800. I was supposed to be downgrading. Still, I wasn't done with the TA-84. They sounded better with the Amperex power tubes I used in the Pendant, but still too dark and uncontrolled. Well, the Pendant is a neutral amp, and the Amperex tubes make sound darker. The TA-84 seems to be a dark amp. Maybe it needed brighter tubes. I had a pair of Tongue Sol EL84s from when I was tube rolling the Pendant, so I put those in, and they sounded a lot better. And then I finally got and put in a matched pair of Brimar 12AU7 tubes, and that's when I was like, what the fuck? Now let's be clear. On a technical level, the Pendant and the VT-70 are still better than the TA-84. They're clearer and more detailed, though the difference isn't as much as you might think. And they have better separation, layering, soundstage, and particularly the VT-70 has tons more slam and that glorious bass, while the Pendant has a blacker background and is much more muscular. The TA-84, meanwhile, has a bit more of a stereotypically tubey sound, but the more I listen to this thing, the more I like it. It's addictive. It doesn't sound baggy anymore. It sounds much more like a normal amp, with that crazy tubey liquidness and smoothness. That's the actual thing I'm looking for, more than something that squeezes every last detail out of a recording or has the fastest transients or whatever. And it doesn't have any of the crispy haze thickness that I found with the OTC amps. Yes, paired with the A23 Plus power amp for my speakers, it's not as big and holographic as the VT-70, but it's still surprisingly big and holographic, especially compared to solid state. Like, do you really need the soundstage to go this far rather than this far? And that's the kind of question I run into a lot as I go up the price ladder and returns diminish. Like, how much is it worth for the music to sound 5% clearer or whatever? I keep switching between amps and keep expecting to like the expensive amps better, maybe with this music or that, and I just don't. For context, I do mostly listen to rock and jazz. Oh, and the treble extension on the TA-84 is I don't give a shit, fuck treble. This is what my EQ profile looks like. I'm not here to help you make purchasing decisions. And of course, you can't argue with the price. Granted, with the tubes, this comes out to a lot more money, but it's still much cheaper than the Pendant or VT-70 stock. It's true the TA-84 has other problems. The build quality isn't nearly as good, especially compared to the Pendant, which is just exceptional. I mean, look at this absolute unit. And if the reviews on Drop are any indication, the TA-84 can also have QC problems and failures, though I haven't encountered any. It also has a distinct loud pop when starting up and turning off, which is annoying, and the stepped attenuator isn't granular enough, so the sound I want is always somewhere between two notches, and I have to attenuate it using my computer volume. The Pendant and the VT-70 don't have these kinds of issues. That said, the TA-84 is much smaller and lighter than those amps, so that's nice. The VT-70 does have a remote. Also, the Pendant is made in the US, unlike the other two amps, so you might be willing to pay more for that. One other thing the VT-70 has that neither the TA-84 or the Pendant has is a tube cage. Like, one time my 2-year-old son was sitting on my lap and threw out his hand to point at something and touched a Pendant tube and burned his finger pretty bad. Like, why does it seem like tube cages are getting rarer? We have kids and pets, people. Tube cage, all the things. Please. Oh yeah. The TA-84 has a DAC. It's this thing right here. I turned it on once. It was okay, a bit too bright and glary in my opinion, and I switched back to my trusty SMSL VMV D2R pretty quick. The point of this video, though, isn't whether you should or shouldn't buy a TA-84 or whether it's good value for money or whatever. This isn't a review. The point is that often when people talk about audio gear, they say things like for the price or in the price category. But in my experience, the relationship between how much you like something and price has almost no relation. The price becomes like a bit of an albatross because you think you have speakers of a certain price, so you need an amp of a certain price too or whatever. And you just don't. It's not that higher end gear doesn't do some things better. Often it does, though not always. But not only doesn't quality not increase at the same rate as price, like an amp 2 times more expensive won't sound 2 times better, but depending on what you're looking for and the kind of things you care about, the things that higher priced gear offers may not matter to you. Like, I think maybe a lot of us could use a think about what we actually want and how much we actually have to pay to get it. But yeah, I think I'm going to sell off the Pendant and the VT-70. It's not the downgrade I was expecting, but it's still pretty good. Meanwhile, I still kind of miss the S17 Pro. I think I might keep it around a bit longer, though I'll keep the micro monitors too. I might have a problem. At the end of February is CanJam New York, and I'm going with 2 specific goals. I want to try some higher end OTC amps to see if they don't have the sound quality I hear with the Pendant and the VT-70. And I want to try the LTA Zodal stuff again to see if it really seems like a dramatic improvement over the TA-84. On the other hand, my experience of massively improving a budget amp with good tubes has piqued my curiosity. Maybe I should do a downgrading adventure for the A23 Plus too, like try replacing it with some Fozzy V3 monoblocks and Sparkos op amps? Maybe? Hey, thanks for watching my nonsense. Like and subscribe and leave a comment, and don't make purchasing decisions based on stuff I say. See you again if I make another one of these.